Is your kid a sore loser? We better get used to it because there's going to be a lot of losses between being a child and being an adult. So we're going to help them get through that with some lessons today.
Hi, welcome back to The Art of Fatherhood. I'm Brian LaFauci.
And I'm Patrick Marino.
And today I lost big time. The intro battle. Yours was way better than mine. Whenever we do our intros, we each record like one or two. And then whatever you see as a listener was clearly the winner. Well, I was the loser today. But I learned from that experience. And that's what we're going to talk about today. You know what I learned today? That I'm a sore fucking loser. Our kids are.
My kid's a terrible loser.
Most kids are a terrible loser.
I was a bad loser. Were you a bad loser when you were a kid?
I lost a lot, so
Yeah,
I
we
think
all
I
lost a
got
lot,
okay
yeah.
with it after a while. No, I mean, I can visualize times where I was not, especially as a kid, and sometimes as a young adult, where I was not at my best moment in a losing situation.
Right.
Yeah.
And we tend to dwell on the losses.
Yeah, and not only dwell on them, sometimes derail us from our ultimate goal.
Right.
And you hear a lot. There's a lot of quotes. You and I are always we end our weekly growth call with a quote all the time, and it's amazing the number of quotes that are focused on the concept of, real success is just being able to go from one failure to the next,
right,
and still have momentum and a good attitude and not be dejected, right?
Yep.
Like, I'll tell a quick story and then we can get into it. I had a recent situation where my daughter was announced as captain of her high school soccer team. Yay, right?
Yay.
This was
Ava.
This was a big deal for her. Like from when last year ended to this year, she was made a conscious effort of really trying to be a good leader, being better than she was before, not just as a player, but like a leader, doing the right thing because she wanted this more than almost anything I've ever seen her want before, just her focus on it. So they got to the point where they were going to announce who it was. And I called her that morning and I said, listen, I am super proud of you with the work that you've put in to this goal. A lot of times in life, we put a ton of work in and we are not rewarded on the back end, but we get stuff out of it that you might not see in the moment. So whatever happens today, super proud of you. So FaceTime me after practice. She FaceTimes me. She had a little band on. Right? It was a good moment. But I was ready, right? I was ready for might lose, right? Might lose. And, we might have to deal with that and and I knew that would have been really hard on her. And in the moment, hard to see the lesson in the loss. So teaching our kid, having a system, back to systems, having a system in place to address the losses is really, really beneficial. Because what do you think? What do most kids and parents do when there is a loss? And we take sports, we can take all different things, right? Just a loss. Kid, how do you manage that normally?
You just usually cry.
You cry. You cry too.
I cry. He cries.
Everyone
we
cries.
We swear. We blame all the other people.
Blame
everybody else. Be like, this wasn't our fault. This was the refere's fault. It was the teacher's fault. Gave us the wrong grade.
Mm-hmm. So a key point there. We're gonna bring
those
up
are all
and
things
come
I
back
do
to.
Anyway.
No, but blame and accountability is a big piece we can teach our kid during a loss. Yeah. Right. And how to evaluate it. So there's blame, there's accountability,
Crying.
there's sadness, right? There's
depression.
Right.
Be depressed, sit in your loss for a while. Well, I think one of the things you kind of skirted around in kind of your system. So I think the first, I think that, there's all these studies about, we've talked about more frequently, we talk about success. And we talk about how to design success, because success, if people are successful, they take that habit and it becomes, it becomes a good habit, right? Because you've had success with it.
Yep.
But we don't talk about losing a lot, and you're going to be losing more often than you win in most circumstances. If you're not that people play baseball anymore, but we used to play baseball.
But if
you got 3 out of 10, right, you're in the Hall of Fame or whatever, that means you lost 7 times. And if you play an 162 game season and you win 80 games, you've
one of the best teams
you've
ever.
lost 80. I mean, if you won 100, you've lost 62 times.
Right.
So like, you're going to lose a lot in your course of your career and your life. But so I think that because you're going to lose, I think it's important, not just before you get to the point where you're doing all the things that you're going to talk about, is there needs to be give yourself a pause.
Yeah.
I think that it's okay to be those things. Maybe it's not, it's okay to go through that part because it's part of the process, I think, is going through the point where you just kind of are sitting in the dealing with the loss and the being upset. Because if you aren't upset, that means you probably didn't care about the result. Like if your daughter had not been named captain, she'd have been very upset.
Crushed.
And so you're not just
to the point where I was like, oh, I hope to God she doesn't.
So what you're not going to do is you're not going to
quitting.
say, well, you know what? It doesn't matter. Well, no, because it matters. I mean,
Does matter.
It's okay to be upset when you've strived and you've worked hard and you've been intentional and you've tried to do all the right things and you still come out on the wrong side. Give yourself that moment to grieve with the loss. Don't you think so? It should be part of the system. I think there's got to be a point where there's like you give a little bit of space.
I hate the saying, but it kind of fits here. But it's like it's okay not to be okay. Like,
right? Yeah.
But in that moment, right?
It's human. It's natural.
Moment, you know, and I'll
and if you shut it down, there's probably something wrong with it.
Yeah.
There's probably something wrong with you. There's probably something wrong with it. There's probably something wrong with everything. If you could just move on, you didn't put enough into it, or you're freaking putting it down somewhere where it's going to come out.
Right.
You know, because you're upset about it. I think that this first step has to be space to be sad, space to be disappointed. You know, because I think that's a big part of it.
Well, I think we're talking, you know, the steps of grieving, right?
Yeah, I think so.
It's
yeah.
very much and allowing there to be like that vent and just, you know, not we can very quickly. And here's the thing that defines a loss, and I think I want to lay this point out because I think this point is going to get to the phase 2 and 3 of how to help kids understand and like take the right approach after a loss. A loss has one key characteristic to it every time, and that is there is a definitive endpoint to a thing. So if you take that concept, every sporting event ever has, except soccer ties, right, has a win and a loss to it. But the only reason that actual event can occur is because there's this arbitrary time, a job that you apply for. It has a time at which they are going to stop taking applications, evaluate those people, and make a decision, right? Everything. So for there to be a loss, and sometimes what we do, I think, is we take a global view of that period of time, and then we attribute like a lot of weight to it. So after the grief, I always like to point out to my kids in every situation that this goes back to our college thing too. It's not a race.
Right.
The first person to get their acceptance letter from college didn't win, right? The person who gets into Brown and you didn't win. They did a good thing. You can also do another good thing, right? Like, so I think what's really important in these settings is and I try to encapsulate this into any time that there's a situation where something didn't turn out, is to remind them that, hey, that's not definitive. It's only definitive for that specific thing at this moment. That's it. You tomorrow we could play the same game, you could win. You say, well, it didn't matter but that's just because there's these arbitrary rules that had to get put in place to make life move forward. So I go there all the time with getting them to take the beginning and the end out of the thing that they are upset about and realize there's a million more opportunities out there like that. It's just this one at this time. It didn't work. Then I can tell them all about my million failures, that don't matter anymore.
Well, I
right?
think if you look at any story of an entrepreneur that's successful, generally speaking, they've had a bunch of things that failed.
Tons. You have to.
They failed a ton. So part of the helping your child deal with losses might be the share experiences, right? Like you just talked about. It's try and put it in perspective, right? How important is this loss in your whole life?
Yep.
There's bigger ones, there's some smaller ones, right? But there's always going to be more time somewhere to make up for the loss, right? So perspective, and then teaching that most people deal with a lot of these failures. And it only takes one really big success to make up for a ton of success.
That's it. Just one.
Yep.
Once they've settled into that concept, the next thing, and it's funny because sometimes I'll do this over a period of like days, weeks, right? Because you gotta deal with the suck in the moment. But a lot of times the next day you can have the conversation and completely different. So I try not to be we're men, so we solve problems ineffectively, frequently.
Men.
We're manly men who solve problems pretty ineffectively. But we always try to solve the problem, right? Mm-hmm. You got to remove yourself from the problem solving when it's just emotional time. But then after, I'll revisit the time construct, usually always. Like, all right, I was in that moment. And then I'll go to, let's focus on let's do internal locus of control now. What happened there that you felt like was unfair? Cool. What could you have done differently or better? I couldn't have done nothing better. Okay, well, that's bullshit, right? So what can you do better and getting the focus to be that? Because all the stuff that was unfair, that's life. You never can control that.
I think that's part of the lesson, isn't it, though?
Right. Yeah. That's going to be there forever.
Oh, we didn't get to go out because it snowed. I mean, you're not going to learn from that, right? You're going to learn to deal with the fact that you can't deal with everything.
Right.
Learn to deal with your lack of control.
Yes.
You go out and play against somebody who's way better than you.
Yes.
And there's nothing you could have done about it. They're older than you. They've been doing it longer. You just started.
Yeah. Have that same game in 15 years.
I think that's part of the dealing with, versus just saying like, well, you could have done better. Well, sure, you could have done better. You still would have lost.
Are
there times when it's impossible to win?
Can I ever beat Michael Jackson? Jesus.
At singing and doing the moonwalk?
That's never, yes. Can I ever beat Michael Jordan at basketball? Absolutely. Right. There will come a time where he may be incapacitated and I can beat him at basketball. Yeah. There's always going to be a moment to, until our time ends, just remember that there's always a moment to atone if you look at it from the standpoint of taking ownership of controlling what you can.
I do think that controlling what you can is important because there are going to be things that you can't control that are going to affect the result. So all of the effort, all of the sometimes doesn't make a difference. Right. I think it's a good lesson for the kids to learn. I also think it's a good lesson because I think that there's definitely some parents like this who will then try and protect their children from losses. In other words, try and keep them out of environments where there's failure.
My mind went to this horror story that a friend of mine told me about a parent whose kid didn't make a middle school team. And he shared with me the chain of how the parent responded publicly.
Right.
And I was appalled. I was like completely appalled. Like, take everything we're talking about right now and dump it down the toilet and do the exact opposite.
Right.
Right. Way to teach your kid.
Well, we've talked about this a ton of times. I mean, like the problem is that we care about our kids more than anything in the world.
Right.
Right. Whenever there's probably like a diagram, right, where it's like the amount of caring and then the amount of irrational response, the amount of rational thinking that you can give probably decreases with the amount of caring that you have for it. The more passionate you about it, the less rational you can be about it. And so I think that that's where the space comes in. We've talked about the 24-hour rule in the past, right? And probably 24 hours in certain circumstances is probably too long, especially in a kid's lifetime. But in terms of giving
refresh what the 24-hour rule is.
Well, the 24-hour rule was something we used to have for parents, right? When something went wrong, right? Because take the emotion and the rationality out of it. So the idea is that in order to properly think it through, you have to give yourself some time because your immediate response is going to be blame and maybe be irrational.
Very emotionally
say some
based.
Things that you don't want to say. Now, once you've given yourself some time to think through it, there still might be something that definitely went wrong that needs to be addressed, right?
Right.
So, but you're going to be able to better deal with it after you've given yourself some time to get through the emotional part of it and to be rational about it. If after 24 hours you still feel like there's something that you want to talk about, you still want to deal with it, you've had a chance to really go through the emotion, then bring it up.
Yeah.
Then talk about it. Then we deal with it. But like a lot of times what happens is once you've given yourself, instead of going mental on Facebook and email or whatever this guy did, give yourself that time, and now you think, oh, it's just middle school, we'll figure it out. You know? Or what a lot of people do is they're like, all right, we're going to private school. We're going to find a school where my kid can play.
Yeah.
Which might be okay. Probably the wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that conversation,
probably in the longer
that conversation
term,
is an interesting one too, because how you frame that to your child. My kid came up to me the other day and said something that he had heard. I know, was it she? Yeah, that she had heard. I was trying to think which kid said it. That was an adult type statement, and I was like, no, that is not at all right. And what she said was, there are some kids that just should, because of A, B, and C, they should be going to a different school because they'll further their career. It was like a private public thing, and I was like, TV timeout. I don't like that statement at all. One, because by saying it, you think that you're not one of those kids. And I had to backtrack it a little bit to say that is a decision that sometimes has a benefit. You know, I get why people make that decision. And I'm not saying that there aren't like, hey, this school's better than this one, so you should definitely, that exists. But at the same sense, I'm like, but in that same conversation, out of this school, we're sending kids to Ivy League schools almost every year. So to tell me that you can't achieve high being here, of course you can. Just, are you going to do the stuff you got to do it, right? So, that was interesting because I didn't like the statement primarily because it was putting this external factor of, my potential is less being here. That's not at all. It's like, what are you willing to put into it? You're going to, get out of it. So, it's interesting, the subtleties of things that we say, especially around the concept of winning and losing with our kids and how it frames for them what the next step for them is going to be. Right. And I always used to get frustrated as a coach when we would go somewhere to play and then the ref would show up and immediately, you'd have a kid and their initial reaction was, oh, forget it. This game's done. That, like, you shouldn't even be thinking about that.
Right. The referee.
Yeah.
The referee.
Yeah.
It's always a referee.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. Or in school with a teacher.
The teacher. Yeah.
Oh,
this
teacher hates me. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Maybe, but right. I'm not saying you're even wrong. Maybe.
But that shouldn't be the first thing you go to.
But if you think you're not going to have a boss at one point in time that you don't like or doesn't like you, what are you going to do? Leave every job because there's someone in the way, that someone you don't like, that you're going to have a rough go if that's your approach. Right? So it's I love those opportunities because, all right, great, let's go. How do you deal with that? Because you learn to deal with it now, you're going to kill it in the world, right? Because we got to learn to deal with those people.
Yeah, so starting off with some space for proper reflection, not just the blame, not just the teacher, the coach, the referee, the whatever. Space, and then understanding that there are some things you can control and things that you can't control.
Yep.
And then find the things that you can control and control the fuck out of them.
And you also brought up another thing that you said it in a different way, but teaching our kids how to communicate when they feel out of control is a great lesson of like managing loss. Because when you feel like something unfair happening or you lost something big, how to manage the 24-hour rule is a great tool to teach our kids, because what's the worst thing our kid can do in a moment where they think they've been wronged by a teacher, right? Or got a bad grade that they should have got a better grade, or they're losing the game, and what do? They mouth off to the ref and get a wreck because so it's teaching them that, hey, when things are going the most difficult, that's when you have to be at your best. It's easy to be at your best when everyone's handing you roses. But,
you have to deal with the adversity.
Yeah, when you're getting cut by thorns
Yeah, and as parents, it's important for us to model that as well.
Yeah.
Because what happens, I mean, it happens in school.
Yep.
The parents like, well, the teacher this, the teacher that, or how would you expect them this? Instead of, you take your kid off the hook because you're defensive of your kid.
Yep.
Right. So especially how you act in the moment, you've got to be rational and you've got to because if you can model that ability, that's sort of like not, and that's something I have to work on too. Because sometimes I'll lose it over something that happens with me, and I got to make sure that it's not affecting my child's ability to deal with it too.
They're watching. Yeah. Good stuff.
So teach your kids to deal with losing effectively.
Embrace the losses.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Embrace the losses. Exactly. Yeah.
And put them in positions to lose. Bottom line is, if they're, putting them in tougher positions where things might be harder and they may fail, gives plenty of opportunity for them to grow and to learn.
That's a big part. That's a big part of it. A big part of the school part was like these, the grade inflation and things like that, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's like we demand so much, and that's what's happened at schools, right? Is the parents demand the A's. Mm-hmm. How can you put them in a situation where they're failing? Mm-hmm. Right now we've got grade inflation, right? It's like we have to embrace the losses as part of life as parents, and we have to teach our kids. I like that better, the embracing, than just dealing with the losses.
Right,
the losses are going to come. We're going to use these as moments to improve.
One of the teachers that I teach with at UConn, he specifically will have a question on his exam that's almost impossible for the students to answer every time. And they get frustrated. They're like, that was so hard. I'm like, don't you want to do hard shit? Isn't that why you're here?
Yeah.
Right? So embrace it.
Embrace the losses.
I'm Brian Fauci.
Patrick Marino.
Till next time.
Thank you.